Okay, super. Now this time it's very dark because somebody has closed all the curtains, but again, the key element is that you actually see the slides. So we hadn't made it too far, so we started really by kind of looking at the definitions, what that means, organizations as communicative structures of control, and we kind of worked through the notions where it's coming from. Yeah, so the literature area that we are studying here has a long tradition. It's 500 years old. Yeah? So there's, if you really want to read the old stuff, so there were some elements that are kind of covered along the lines. So when we come to organizing organization and organizational communication, we arrived at differentiation of tasks and functions. And a key reading to kind of illustrate this, or where the idea was coming from, is actually still the old work from Adam Smith, and it's about wealth generation. How can you generate wealth? And again, if you are curious about the history, read it. It's a 100-pager, quick read, very big written, so big writing. It's about how to make pins, yeah? And he has a very logical argument there. I'm not sure the most fruitful one. Actually, shall I switch one of the lights on? I feel like you're potentially falling asleep, by the way. Oh, there is this one. We can work from the back. Is that better?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay. And if you want, we can close the door as well. Otherwise, my colleagues will complain as well, again, that I'm always shouting. Yeah, if I'm speaking too loud, then just let me know. Yes, this is not my intent. So, yeah, I mean, we can just revisit it briefly. So what makes an organization a communication system? It's really the interdependence of the individuals that you bring together. Yeah, so organization here being the notions that you as a person belong to a grouping called organization. So you have some form of those characteristics. So one was interdependence, so we had here kind of the recognitions that in most organizations we come together to achieve something together. So the ultimate goal of the organization may not be our goal. So if you think very practically, if you work in a project team, you may be one of the team members and you're doing your bit, and you may do it in exchange for pay, reputation to work on this project. You may do it because it's the project to work for your career on. Yeah? So it's it's very prestigious, something like that. Yeah? So there are all kinds of reasons why you may want to be part of that organization. But these are legitimate, and here the challenge is, of course, to achieve something together. So it creates complexities by intent in how we actually communicate and work together. Yeah? Then we have the differentiation of tasks and functions. You will notice very quickly, if you go into project management, usually in your teams, depending on the projects that you're working on, nobody has the same role like you. And this is often quite easily based, so I explained here traditionally, this comes still from the old tradition of dividing work into trades and crafts. So you were born, and then if you were kind of lucky, then you may have parents that had high aspirations, so they would put you in an apprenticeship, and you would become a carpenter or blacksmith or something wonderful like that. Or alternatively, you were born into some other formats where you would have a role that would kind of be attached to you basically growing up. You wouldn't change anything, right? This would be your skill set for life. If you were good, you would become a master and maybe run a small business. Now, this is as far as ambitions went. Now, this is where the division of labor comes from. Now, this is, of course, partly outdated. In some areas, it still exists as such. Yeah, so largely nowadays we work actually in professions. Yeah, we are trained on particular organizational roles. So I explained the example in Singapore. I was fascinated. We went to a big building site, and they still recruited what we would call in the UK laborers. So they went to street corners where people were waiting, and said, hey, we have work for 20 people, who's up for it? And they kind of started negotiating prices, yeah, and then they were up for it, they jumped in the bus and drove to the site and started working. Yeah? So this still is a role of working, of how to divide task function, but nowadays we have a new hybrid. Yeah? The other extreme is we have people that are kind of specialist knowledge worker that have committed their life to kind of develop an expertise, and they do an interesting thing. They develop with the changing world. So we had in the design the idea that a designer nowadays, in the past, was a beautiful craftsman that hand drew everything, and many architects and related professions still cherish this as a kind of probably nostalgic leftover. But nowadays it's actually mostly done in IT. We had first AutoCAD, so this was a drawing program. Nowadays we have digital representation, so this means you have computing skills. And it goes much further. We have even augmented reality, where you put the visual device on and it takes you into different levels, and we can go further along that line. So here the specialism, and as well for you maybe the profession as a project manager, is not so much a skill set that you learn once and it stays this way. You will see professional membership means continuous personal development, CPD. So it's kind of a commitment like, okay, I will hold this identity and develop along the lines. So it's quite interesting, and with this we have again still the idea of differentiation. Now, organizational communication has as well the goal orientation. This is very similar to the project. We recognize as well the difference here in the definition is that we don't have necessarily the permanent organization, but we have a temporarily, so a duration-based organization that exists for the goal, and then afterwards is likely to be dismantled or carried on in other means. That was the main difference to the main organization and maybe project organization or temporarily organization. Now then we came to one of the topics that we will look at in a lot of detail, and that is control mechanisms. Now here we have direct control, and what do we mean actually in organizational communication as direct control? Well, that is, for example, close supervision of an employee. So in a factory floor, that is the person that is the supervisor and tells you, for example, how to assemble a part. So you learn this, you assemble it, and then there's maybe even an attempt at the speed. So the supervisor may come around and says like, look, you're not doing it fast enough, or other way around, you're doing it too fast, it's not accurate enough. And the supervisor has often the direct insight into telling you how it's done. Now this is called direct control. And it's one control that you still see in project managers. Do you have an example in mind? Where does a project manager maybe exercise direct control? Or do we have something like that, a supervision role? Or what do you think? On site, yeah? On site. On a building site. Okay, I like. So, and where would you see this?
If the project manager was with the contractor, he could be on the building site issuing orders for what he sees.
Yeah. So this is a good example. Construction site, we may see something like that. So a very hands-on idea would be somebody digging a hole and having realized that digging the hole, if you do this over 8 hours, is a very different game to digging a hole for 5 minutes. And then the supervisor not being happy, the foreman maybe like, no, come on, you have to accelerate. And like lifts for 50 minutes, and then the supervisee would probably take the recommendation for 50 minutes as well, and then again slow down so he hasn't got a broken back at the end of the day. But again, this would be maybe an example. But we still have that. You're quite right. So actually, in a very distant past, I used to work as a project manager for the client. We would literally do this. So we would come to the site and look at our main contractors, project managers, and they would play games. So for example, traditional, so there are many games to be played, so they wouldn't go for exact quantities, they would go with estimates and calculate against it. So then I would tell them like, no, you have to be more accurate. Look, you're doing this wrong, and they would hate me for this, because they would lose basically the margins based on that recognition. So there is an element of that where we actually step into this. Now, what is technological control? Well, so here we have control speed of work. Now, this goes actually even back to the arguably scientific study of management. Now, I just want to point one thing out. When universities were confronted with that, the Taylorism, we have a look at that. And if you read the book chapter, there's a small anecdote, but we come to that in more detail. I just want to point out that when Ford's and Taylor's scientific way of management came to universities, we started the business school. And that was snobbery from all the other faculties, because I said, like, there's nothing scientific about what you're doing. You have to start your own faculty. And I did, the business school. Yeah, but nowadays we have actually advanced from that. So Ford's moving production line. What do you think was the idea behind it? Does anybody know? Ford, the car? What was the motive? What was Ford famous for? Has anybody heard of that? Okay, what was Ford famous for in the 30s and 40s? It's probably not our time, yeah, but we're talking here 1930 or 1940. What do you think it was famous for, Ford? Did everybody have a car at that time? No. They were kind of the challenger from the German version of VW. Yeah, they wanted to bring cars to everybody. And they had realized another problem. They had a very large population and a very large market. And to do so, they had to be more efficient. So cars were normally assembled in a little garage. Actually, you can still do this today. Yeah? If you want a fancy sports car, yeah, then the best way of doing it, order the parts and assembly it yourself. Yeah? It's a little bit constraining, particularly if you look at the pricing of some of the cars. Yeah, but it's still, you pay extra for hand assembled. Yeah, all I'm saying. Yeah, so particularly if you like sports cars. Yeah? So, and this is still true. So Ford kind of recognized, as long as we had the quality and the car doesn't fall apart, you know, the brake doesn't fall off after the first corner, then we can probably sell it. And that was actually the motivation. They sort of sequencing the roles in a way that they could actually build a better car. And the control was here as well on the sequencing. So in other words, if a worker wasn't actually holding up to the manufacturing line, then he was too slow, or she. Mostly he's actually in the Ford company at the time. Yeah? So it goes a little bit back, control speed of work. Here you had task packages that you had to basically do according to the machine. Yeah? So the moving assembly line, that was actually the automation. Yeah? This is still where a huge fear comes from, kind of human change and technology change, that people being sequenced against the machine. And if you want to see a little bit comedy against it, to get a feeling for that, Charlie Chaplin had a wonderful black and white movie of the machine. Yeah? So if you YouTube that, you can get a feeling of what was associated with that. Yeah? Then further technology control was both workers and customers subject to technology control. Where do we have this nowadays? What is technology control? This is quite abstract, right? I have examples. And what does that mean? Do we use it in project management? It's a heavy question, right? Technology control. Or technological control, yeah. Do we still sequence? Do we check it? We can do, yeah. So in project management we have 4D models, yeah. So this is a design model that has 3 dimensions and is trimmed against progress of construction, assembly. So we use that in planes, we use that in large infrastructure projects like bridges, tunnels. But this is normally more for simulation rather than measurement. Is there any project interface where we measure? So don't think too advanced with technology. Yeah? So simple technologies. So we do actually all of them. Yeah? So your spreadsheet is actually controlling speed of progress, right? So even very simple, critical path is the recognition again, yeah, on how fast you can sequence the work. Yeah. So again, so here we are touching already on our tools. Now we have another level here, the bureaucratic control. This is a system of rules and format structures. Yeah? And actually, next, I have to admit, in this module you face it. Yeah, so you have the template that I ask you to kind of submit in your paper. So that is actually such a thing. But do we use it in project management as well? System of rules and format structures. Yeah, examples?
Some governments enforce certain structures. And there is sort of associated bodies out there who have their own structures. I think
APM, yeah.
APM, yeah.
Yeah, so you're spot on. Yeah, so this is what we really do in project management a lot. Yeah, and arguably the professional bodies are run by you. You may not have noticed this, but you, as potential project managers, are actually the people in the driving seat of the professional associations or professional bodies. But we use here systems of rules and format structures. So you may recognize it as a project life cycle. Yeah, we have sequenced activity packages that we can use to negotiate with our team and our clients. Yeah. Or format structures, so again, this is professional bodies, Prince2, you name it, PMI, there are many that you can use. As well, Agile, the newer processes. They are basically lightly touch bureaucratic control systems. Again, Agile and as well some of the more paperless ones, they work still with the reporting mechanisms. Yeah? So that is actually quite an interesting one. And then as well, defining feature for of modern organizations. So particularly if you work with public contracts, you are often asked to do additional reporting, which may not make sense to your product or your actual service that you're providing, but it's required to be actually in the position to provide this product or service. Yeah, so it's again a control mechanism, so we have it a lot actually. Then ideological control. Now this sounds controversial. What are you talking about? Yeah, ideology, is it really that serious? So this is here I have identification with beliefs and values. So the bonus for us is if you arrive there, if you create ideological control as a mechanism at the heart of your project, there's one huge benefit, and it's a certain line. Little direct supervision necessary, a corporate culture. Now, this means as a project manager, you can kind of give them a phone call on Friday, hey, how's it going? Well, how do you feel about it? Yeah, and you have very committed workers. Yeah. Do we have that in projects? No. Yeah, it sounds again ideological control. You have to be with me here, right? This is very old literature. Yeah, so the categories are old, but you will see very quickly once we start actually talking about it, they are very meaningful mechanisms. So do we have something like that? Ideological control. Again, that sounds quite tough, right? So we had recognized we are talking here about power, and power sounds again somehow negative, but it's not. It's neutral. It's in every human relationship. Even in your relationship with your mobile, yeah, it's actually very powerful. Be very aware of that. That is one of the most powerful devices, particularly in terms of technological and as well ideological control. Yeah. So, but what do I talking about? Ideological control. What does that mean? Are you under ideological control? Am I under ideological? Yeah.
Is it things like Kaizen?
Oh, wow! Here you have jumped ahead, but you're quite right. Yeah. So where does Kaizen come from?
Japan, isn't it?
Yeah. And what is a big kind of methodology or philosophy that it's associated with?
I think it's a mechanism for reducing waste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just after Lean. Yeah. So Lean thinking was developed as a actually philosophy. Yeah. Initially kind of for Toyota. Yeah, this was automotive and as well as shipping and construction. But they wanted to come up with a culture where you could kind of empower the individuals that were working in the company to kind of look after themselves. Yeah? It was a very, very powerful mechanism. It has been attempted to be copied in many different cultures, although it was actually culture specific. Yeah, so this is quite interesting in itself. But yeah, so corporate culture is still a very strong mechanism. You see it in big corporations, companies like Toyota, Red Bull, they really try to strive so. But it's as well on the individual level. Yeah? So on a rational basis, I get confronted repeatedly with this. It doesn't make a lot of sense if you're a project manager to become an academic, and still I'm here. Yeah, this is a big question why that happened. So I identify very much with the culture, yeah, and believe that this is the right thing to do. Yeah, so much so that I look after my own research and without much guidance, so that there's a certain element of supervision just being in a delegative or visionary form, and I can work with that. Yeah? Similar for you, yeah, if you believe you're a project manager, then you buy as well into that concept. Yeah? I'm not sure you do yet. Yeah? Maybe after this lecture series you will be a lot more critical, yeah, and think about it. But you will see as well probably that power is actually a neutral platform. It depends on how it's balanced and how it's used. Well, not neutral, but there's an element of always there. Yeah. Now there's as well disciplinary control. This is kind of the last one. So this is kind of bottom up from control. Yeah. So focus on the self as a project. So self as a subject and object of knowledge. This is again very old language. What am I talking here about? What could that be? Disciplinary role. So the key here is in the discipline. Do you belong to a discipline?
Just like a hierarchy, management?
Yeah, but why bottom up? That sounds strange, right?
Oh right, yeah, true.
It goes a little bit in the ideological control, yeah, but it works the other way around. But what could that be? Disciplinary control.
Like open offices and things like that, no? Or whatever it's called, like open, like you just go in and like speak, you make the decisions as an employee, like you can just go in and talk to like management and stuff like that.
Yeah, you think in the right direction, but over a corner. Yeah, so it's an entrepreneur in you. So you too, after doing the MSc of project management, you will probably apply it to jobs, to an organization, yeah, to belong to. And you're doing so probably, well, it depends. So sometimes you get a knock and your friend tells you like, hey, I really want you to work for you. Then this is maybe not the case. But here it's an entrepreneurial endeavor of the individual to promote themselves into a position, yeah, where they want to work. Now this is as well as signing up to actually being disciplined. Yeah? You are showing that you can work in that work. Now here we are not even talking yet about the skill set or knowledge that you have, or the discipline you're belonging to, or the profession that you're belonging to. But those are all disciplining functions, and they kind of reside with the individual. Yeah? In the past, if you ask your parents or your grandparents, they will probably tell you like, oh no, we were loyal to our employer. Now that was a different construct. That was as well disciplinary control, but that was a psychological contract. Yeah? So it's a different phenomena. But nowadays, we are very much in a different economy. We're actually kind of not necessarily competing, but we are self-promoting ourselves in a career. Yeah? So the career aspiration is actually disciplinary control. Okay, so again, keep in mind, this is a run-through at the moment. So we will cover that actually in a lot more context, and I hope a little bit more fun than the dry definitions that I have here. Now, let's think a little bit about this. Yeah? So we are still with the defining organizational communication. Now, I propose here that hypothesis. Does anybody know what a hypothesis is? This is a new term. Yeah, we use that a lot in social science or as well general science. What could be a hypothesis? Has anybody come across that before?
Essentially a guess.
Yes, it's an assumption. But is it like a random assumption?
Based on research.
It's normally an informed guess. And normally you formulate it in a way so that you're trying to test if it's actually false. So you try to really hardly imagine, how can I prove that that is actually wrong? That is kind of the idea. Yeah? So if you have an idea or an assumption and you think that, ooh, we have here something that seems to stick true. Every time I manage a project, I come across this. yeah, then you want to formulate, okay, how could I test if that is actually false? That is the intent. But in other words, hypothesis means see this, so it's an idea. And so hypo means up, so it's up in the air, we don't know yet. Yeah? And so if you read more old philosophy, you will see as well that there were people like Hegel. They said you don't have to have a hypothesis, you can just have a thesis, and then you can test for the opposite, which is the antithesis, and then you can come to the synthesis, which is the probably closest guess you can come to. Yeah? So it's first for, against, and then compare, and what makes sense. This is kind of the synthesis. Now this was Hegel, again, we are here kind of 18th century, so it's not most recent. Yeah? So here we go with a hypothesis. So I would argue to be successful in organizational communication, success can only be judged by the product or service that you actually produce. Yeah? So all the control mechanisms that we are talking here, the power relationship, you are in the dilemma situation where you have to balance them meaningful so you actually arrive at a good product or service, right? This is an assumption. You don't have to believe me this yet. Yeah, so we have to investigate that. It also suggested that improved performance in industry requires more than better processes, new technology on contractual relationships. So contractual relations as well, a wonderful disciplinary power if you want there. And this is why a direct element, but we will come to that. And this will bring that improved performance is dependent on motivated and valued people working in a culture of cooperation, teamwork, and continuous improvement. Now, what does it mean for our control? Let's do a test. Well, what is a team? Is this like a control mechanism? So, what is this? Is it like direct control or bureaucratic control, ideological control, disciplinary control, or technology? I take guesses. So here we have close supervision. Would you be happy with this when your team members start closely supervising you? Is this team or this is a supervisor, right? So you may have that, yeah. So you may have a team with a team leader, but here's already the difference, yeah. So it's probably then a supervisor. But in a team, where would we be on the control mechanisms?
Ideological.
Why? Yeah.
Because in a team, you're a group of individuals focusing on the goal, common goal.
Yeah, shared goal. Yeah, you're spot on. And you often see as well kind of the cultural belief values aspect. Yeah, so you're kind of, well, you will have that with Alan and Michelle. Did you have that already?
Yeah.
Tuckman? Yeah? Yeah, so Tuckman, typical ideological control, yeah? First, what is it? Does anybody know from the lecture? What's this today? Forming, storming?
We were talking about teams today.
Okay.
Groups, the difference between groups and teams.
Yes. Yeah. It's a powerful ideological control mechanism. Yeah. So much so that we have actually embraced it. We come to this in a separate session. The sad thing is, there's very little empiri that you're actually increasing productivity or performance. Yeah? Don't tell that Alan and Michelle, they will be heartbroken, but the empiri speaks against it. 200 years of empiri is against us, but again, very strong mechanism to get things done. Yeah? Production performance, difficult. Yeah? So then specialism and kind of sequencing and lean, yeah, we had lean earlier, really makes a difference. Yeah? So then we are there. Okay, so it's for continuous improvement. There is another mechanism, so we have quite a few here that we really embrace, and I will probably change your perspective with this book a little bit on this. Now we have as well, additionally, with the communication processes, the definition of organizational communication. So again, to round this up, this is a process of creating and negotiating collective, coordinated structures of meaning through symbolic practices oriented towards the achievement of organizational goals. Now again, this is quite heavy. Yeah? What are we talking here about? What do you think is coordinated structures. Is this relevant to us, to project management? Coordinated structures. Do we do something like that? What could that be? I should have really translated kind of the proper definition more in the project management language and then showed you the old ones. But in the book you will see it's actually there. So coordinated structure. So first of all, the process of creating and negotiating collective coordinated structures of meaning. Do we do this in projects? Okay, some people smile, so I guess they have a hint. Structures of meaning through symbolic practices oriented towards the achievement of organizational goals. This is actually our core mission in projects. Yeah? You have the idea, you initiate the project, you manifest it in some more grabbable form, the idea into a design, yeah? So a visual representation. Yeah? This is just structures of meaning. And the digital model, I don't know if you have worked in the whole project life cycle of a product before, the model is never what's finally built. Never. It's a close shot at it, yeah? It's normally very close, but it's never the same. That is actually quite terrifying to realize, yeah? But it's a translation process, yeah? It's an interpretation process of making an idea or a vision concrete into a product or service. Yeah? And this is where what we're doing. Now, symbolic practices, maybe making nice drawings, or it can be as well the organization of the actual factory line. Yeah, so you are creating spaces where people can actually meaningfully interact. Structures of meaning. This is our plans. Yeah? This is our cost-benefits analysis. Yeah? But we come to that in detail. So this is again kind of the conceptual framework, if you want. Yeah. Okay, let's make a little bit sense of this. And I wanted to open it a little bit up. So if you look at that, successful project organizations, communication processes, so I claim further, so this is more kind of claims, it's all about getting from people the most that they can give to sustain and develop your business. Yeah, so even if you're just working as a project-based organization, your team will be most likely be engaged for that reason. Yeah, this includes enabling people to find a job sufficiently interesting and satisfying to encourage them to perform well. Yeah, so actually in this research, you will see if you give them kind of mind-numbing task. Yeah, so initially, particularly if you're learning, this is interesting, but they leave very quickly. Yeah, so once they've figured it out, then you have to come up with something new. So this is a big challenge, particularly if you're in the role of providing this. Now, motivating people to work efficiently and effectively, which requires the manager to understand the relationship between the motivation and productivity. You want to see as well why people are actually motivated, why did they actually come, and then you have, again, a control tool where you can create an environment that is suitable so that they want to work and enjoy it as well, maybe. Yeah. So, but again, there's a bottom line to it from the literature. So the literature suggests it's all about getting things done through other people, at least for the project manager, and not simply keeping everybody apparently busy and happy, so that they're contradicting theorems. So Adam Smith had this well in consideration that if people don't know what to do, then they may do stupid things. So this was Adam Smith with the pin factory. He had clearly a different agenda. Yeah, so be careful with this. And again, the happy argument is as well an interesting one. But we know now from psychology, and you will have that again with Alan and Michelle, that happiness, you need to be unhappy. Otherwise, you don't appreciate. You're just content. Yeah, it feels okay, but there is no fluctuation anymore. That is not when you're happy anymore. So the concept is as well kind of worn, but still it's holding up. Now we have to frame a little bit the series of organizational communication further. So so really explaining why is this such a strong concept. Well, first of all, it holds up empirically. So what we can claim was a theory is basically a truth or an understanding that you're establishing that will be empirically bulletproof. So this is really something, a predictive model that gives you a very decent insight and gives you better informed decision making. So, but to understand this, we basically want to do a meta-theoretical framework. This means what assumptions are made about knowledge. This means as well, what can we actually say about the communication tools that we are using, the control tools that we are using in our relationships, and what are made of about communication. So yeah, again, the assumptions here that people understand and interpret, but we will come to that later, and what assumptions are made about the reality. So if you're working with people, does it mean that it's a physical reality if they perceive or believe otherwise? So there is actually a dilemma for you as a project manager. If you're dealing with people, you can convince them of something, but if they don't believe it's true, then you are in a dilemma. So we have to really look at understanding, sense-making, and social constructs, why people actually believe certain things or why they work certain ways. Now there's another element actually with organizational communication. So this is a critical approach, and it occurs really at two levels. So the crisis of representation is a little bit our, if you want, the curse of our current time. So we had that earlier in the session. Nowadays we are not so much challenged in finding information, but we are really kind of battling with what information is the right information, what is legitimate, what can we actually use and it's okay, it's accurate enough to get us forward, what is actually false information. That is your big challenge. Now for this level, we have a look first of all at the epistemology. So what do we know, or what can we actually say from what we are talking about? Is it really meaningful? Is it really making sense? Or can we really claim this knowledge is true? And then there's the second one, there's the voice. Who gets to speak about what we know? And this is really the element where we are looking at the gender setting. So crisis of representation has two levels. One that is actually in our project, and second of all, what information and kind of communication we are actually using. If that doesn't make sense yet, don't worry, read the chapter, it will make more sense then. Now, so for our framework, we are actually kind of evaluating different representation. So one is functionalism. This is a most basic format. So if you come in as a project management, even at the most basic level, you have to kind of start with that. So kind of functionalism is, okay, we have to build a project, let's do it, focus on the process of discovery. So maybe you are learning actually like, okay, it's more efficient, two people carrying the, should we take a controversial, two people are better in carrying my sparkling water boxes into my fourth floor of the house, than one person, and I certainly would sign that, But then there may be other elements. You notice that if you have 20 people, nobody gets through the staircase anymore, so it's slowing the process down. So there's an element of that. And if you kind of take this abstract idea and take it on the beautiful example, I think I saw this on Facebook or some other thing. So project manager, this is a joke of course, the project manager believes that 9 women can deliver 1 baby in 1 month. This is of course not true. There are process sequencing issues. So the joke is that there is a limitation to this. So the process of discovery is one. Dominant discourse of social sciences is another one. So we go a little bit into history and look actually what organizational communication looks like, what has worked in the past, and what we have adapted in project management in particular. And then perspective of most management theory actually falls into that. So all our management theorems that you have learned in, for example, project program portfolio management, they circulate around this. So there's an efficiency, effectiveness claim. There is there's as well a control argument inherent, and it leads actually to the next one. We aim to predict with our tools. Predict, control, generalize about human behavior. Now this can be risky, particularly if you work on cutting edge projects. This can go actually potentially wrong. And it's a conduit model of communication dominates, so communication as information transfer. And here we have as well key authors that kind of promote that. Yeah, and you will see that as well. Information transfer is literally what you are covering the next 3 sessions with Mohamed Qassem, yeah, our associate professor for project management, and he looks in particular at how we are using information systems. So I mentioned that as well. We have as well communication technologies that were wonderful tools like binoculars or a microscope. Yeah? So you have to be careful. And traditionally, communication technologies were tools or devices that allowed you to go beyond the perceivable. Yeah? So before the microscope existed, we didn't know that small things were everywhere. Yeah? After the microscope, it was clear, it's everywhere. Yeah? So now those were kind of breakthroughs, but it will be a little bit more functional. So you looked, of course, at the more recent context. Yeah. Now then we have the interpretivism, so discourse of understanding. Now this is as well what we will cover. So here we are looking at the social constructs of perspective. Now this is so you can understand why maybe certain team members or groupings may not understand something that you have made very often clear, and they still don't get it. Yeah? So maybe there's an intentionality, or maybe it really doesn't comprehend to them. Yeah? So then you have to think about it another way, and this is basically the tool that will show you very easily what's going on. Yeah? Now, humans create realities collectively as they interact together. So beautiful examples are Facebook, but we do so as well in typical political intent. Yeah? So if you have a project and you want to kind of win the bidding against other competitors, you may spend some time socializing with a client and understanding what they're actually evaluating the project scenario against. Yeah? Now, in many contexts, this is considered not desirable. In the UK, we would actually consider here collusion as a potential issue. Now, in many other cultures, this is considered the baseline of understanding about what you're being judged against. Yeah? So, if you understand their realities, what they're looking for, you can as well be a lot more accurate in applying for it. Yeah? Questions or any observation? No? Now then we have as well the communication does not occur in organizations. Communication creates organizations. This is the recognition that if you just set up a project organization and you kind of give everybody a contract and then don't communicate, you are not organizing actually. So communication creates actually organizations. So by what you actually communicate, you are actually creating an active role in organizing. You know, you're setting the agenda. And be very aware as a project project manager, you're very powerful in this. And it focuses as well on organizational cultures. And here we have qualitative methods focused on stories, symbols, metaphors to actually understand what they're talking about. And study of members, everyday sense making. So you want to kind of come as well to comprehension. Now, okay, so I have 3 more, but I will cover those very quickly because it's quite dry, and we will cover actually this as kind of a comparative frame for our cases with projects. So here we have the critical theory. This really originated in the Frankfurt School, so have a look at the chapter. It's actually quite interesting. So it's a discourse of suspicion. Yeah? If power is monopolized. So here it's again a social constructionist perspective. It's a question of why has been power monopolized this way? Is it actually legitimate? Is it actually functional in its role? Yeah, and it's as I said that already. So focus on power, organizations as political structures. Now in projects we have that a lot. Yeah, so particularly when you look at Freiberg's study of how we actually get the mega projects, yeah, for Olympics or city development or maybe a development project in a whole district area, it's often to do with strategic misrepresentation. Yeah? So Ben Freiberg tells us that as project managers, we make a claim where we know it's not true, just to win the bid. Yeah? And then we say, oh, you didn't tell us this district area, I just thought of this district area when I did you the pricing, and then they're, oh yeah, okay, the specifications weren't clear, okay, can we negotiate, and then you get a better price. So this is very common practice on big projects. So political structures are very important to understand. So if you go in those kind of projects, they're kind of packed in different places differently. So in some places it's obvious what I described. In other ones it's very indirect. But they exist in all places. There is not one country that doesn't do it and other countries that do it. It's basically a worldwide phenomenon. There's this very important critique of how organization creates systems of control. So there's this bluntness about it. So after reading this chapter, you will be able to see where they actually come from and what you have to look for. And then there's an examination of corporate colonization processes. This is from Dietz. We have a little bit to look at it. So this is a little bit the focus as well of our study. Now with postmodernism, we actually cover only a few aspects, but I wanted to show you a little bit the overview. So what we will look at is the rejection of universal truths. So in project management, we have 4 in particular with the big frameworks into certain traps there. So we know, for example, that project performance is better with companies that don't per se apply a standard framework than those that do, which is surprising, right? You would think standardization brings more lessons learned, but actually empirically that doesn't hold up. So we have a little bit a look at that. There's as well a device of rational planning and of modernity. So it's a recognition that we are actually not as rational as we may think we are. So it's a very creative process, which is more erratic or more locally based, which is interesting. Then it's as well a way of thinking about the world. So here we have challenges idea that science leads to progress. So again, as well recently there was a big study with, so one of the biggest one was, for example, the assumption that infrastructure develops countries. And there was a recent study in China, particularly with the political moves at the moment, that the development of the infrastructure was not really linked to progress. What was quite interesting. And challenge of Western canon of knowledge, we have a little bit to look at that because there are very different approaches around that are very successful, that are not really recognized in the literature, or in the project management literature, I should say. And again, it's a kind of recognition that alternative approaches may work for you. So it's not one fits all. You have to really kind of find out. Now in the books, I go into a controversial comparison. I don't know if you're actually aware of those 2 individuals. It's Paris Hilton versus Kim Kardashian, and it's there's nothing outside the text. So they have kind of established whole new business. So it's quite an interesting one. And then there's a study of organizations outside of discipline. So this we will actually cover post-Fordist organizations. We only scratch on. And culture of enterprises is important for you because project managers actually face this. Oh, this was far too far. I don't know how to do this. I jumped it all. I'm really sorry. Okay, I just wanted to show you actually 2 more. That's it? Yeah, sorry. So we have as well feminism. It's a discourse of empowerment. It's a recognition that we have actually kind of created gender in a lot of our projects as well. So we're kind of questioning this. Sadly, in the last week of the lectures, so if you're interested in this topic, then make sure that you're reading up on it before and maybe incentivize one of the debates. As I said, this is a medium to kind of collect primary data as well. We can move this a little bit forward. But so there's clearly a lot of stuff to this, and a separate chapter as well. Now, where's project organization in all of that? Now, I kind of explained, if you were there in the morning, that this is kind of the underlying theory. So we are looking here at the history of the tools that we are using to understand what they're actually used for. Now, the syllabus does not go into the territory, but concentrates on those practices which might engage employee participation and commitment, and those organizational practices that might also motivate and encourage commitment, but also to get the best from workforce that meets the needs of the business they work for, the internal and external context they belong to. Long story short, with those tools, you can work better with your team members. Yeah? You will see as a project manager, you are often engaged in power games, yeah? And often not so productive. Yeah? But once you understand them, once you understand the needs, you have a different format and you can be a lot more constructive and create an environment where you actually have a strong negotiation basis or even collaborative commitment. This is why this topic is quite important. So it's not as dark and sinister as ideologic and control terms suggest, but those are really powerful tools for us. So it's really about making you sensitive to actually the underlying mechanisms that we are using. So again, if you want to revise this is quite okay. So again, just to explain what we are doing. So this is my wonderful map that I kind of mapped out with the International Project Management Association. So this is a chapter like the PMA in Europe. And we kind of try to identify what is essential for the project manager. So we had kind of topics and practice, and then we had a look, where's this all coming from? Yeah? So this is as well personal social world. So you can see leadership, teamwork, culture, awareness, yeah? And the bombs indicate that it's very explosive stuff. Yeah? If you don't get that right, this is normally where kind of hearts get broken and trust goes. Yeah? And it's as well negotiation, interpersonal communication, conflict crisis. Now this is hopefully all what you are covering with Ellen and Michelle, right? I hope so. Yeah. Because we are kind of going a step onto the meta level. Yeah, here you have as well other elements. So this is kind of the practical side, the terminology that we are using, but it relies, of course, on theory. So what we are doing is here, the systems theory, cultural theories, and organizational theory. Yeah, organization theory in general, theory of power, so important, we know this. Yeah. Project managers have repeatedly been identified as not being critical enough of the decision environment. Yeah. So as a project manager, you can quite easily get torn up in a power game, yeah, that you want to be the winner in. This may not be conducive to actually achieving the goals of your project organization. And with this, we have kind of communication theory, conflict theory, action theory, decision theory, group dynamics. This is what we are covering, yeah, particularly here as well and here. Yeah? Okay, there you go. I wanted to show you this, that you know as well what you're getting into. Again, this was a theory. I can show it to you as well in professional bodies. This is from the VW group. They have kind of mapped that out, right? So this is here you can click on it as well, then you can see the roadmap and projects. Here we are going into the soft side, yeah? And you should have those as underlying principles anyway, but we look at the theory of the soft side, yeah? Okay. Now we did this already. If you haven't had a chance to look at the assessment yet, do so in your own time. But if you have questions, come to me. Don't wait long with it, so that we can address it straight away. Now there's another kind of recognition. Is there any issue? Now in project management, we have increasing standards. And that was an old joke that I always used to bring with covering standards. So how standards proliferate, so be aware it's a control tool. And you too may actually embrace it in your organization as an initial standard. So at the moment we have something like 24 competence standards. So I'm a little bit out of date, but I couldn't change the comment, or I didn't want to really. So 14 ridiculous, we need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use cases. Yay! And you know, this is very popular. Actually, I was there. This is a World Congress for Project Management 2014. I remember that we need one standard to rule all. And I was like, wow, they haven't seen this comic. They should have really had a look at it. And yeah, then we had a standard actually. It's the ISO 21500, right? This is now our ISO standard for project management. And situation now, there are 15 competing standards. Yeah? So it's another one. Yeah, but yeah, so just be aware of that. This means as well, and yeah, be aware as well. For fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Yeah, and again, the idea is, those are control mechanisms, and I hope you can already kind of hint and recognize some of them. Okay, this was quite heavy, and I run already over my hour. Did you want a 5 minutes break? Okay, 5 minutes break, and then I want to hear a little bit from you. So you can think already about it. What are the issues in your organizations? And we come back in 5 minutes? Yeah? Okay. You all right?
Yes. I just want to ask